Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science. So it's just so loud in your truck that you can't hear it anymore?
That would have been a distinct possibility when I was back in high school and undergrad. My truck was too loud to hear over. But
well, now
I grew up and realized the value of having a quiet truck, especially as a hunter.
I was just about to say, it seems like it's really swung the other way. Now we're trying to be as quiet as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I've been really enjoying when I go out and work with landowners. A lot of them will have like an electric cart. One of them I visited with in Mississippi recently had a really nice electric cart, and we drove all over his property with that. Man, it's just completely quiet.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, those are nice.
Pendulum has swung.
Yeah, and then people are really getting into the bikes too, the e-bikes and all that stuff.
Yeah, I have one. So
do you?
Yeah, I do.
Do you just ride it around the neighborhood, or?
That's what I generally do. Yeah.
You got a helmet?
No, I don't actually.
Oh, come on, safety first, Marcus.
Yeah, I know. I have one of those little things that you put the kids in, that you can put behind it.
Yeah.
No, my dad bought it because he wanted to get back into turkey hunting, and he's had some issues with his back and his knees. So he's not able to walk like he used to.
Right.
Way back in the woods. So that was the idea. So he was going to use that to help facilitate access. And it turns out when he rode it, it really was hard on his back because of the issues he was dealing with. So he never used it, and he gifted it to me to use for that same reason.
Yeah. Well, you need to get you a bright blue Florida Gator helmet to ride around it.
I already have that.
Okay.
It's got a face mask on it.
Oh, a full face helmet. That's even better.
It's actually, yeah.
You got to protect. You got to protect that moneymaker.
This grill.
Yeah.
Protect this grill right here.
All right. Well, so
how many times have we recorded this episode, by the way?
I was going to say down to business. What are we talking about today? I have a feeling I know how this one's going to go.
Yeah. Well, for everybody out there, we are trying to maintain the highest quality product we can, and it's difficult when you don't have the talent.
And I keep forgetting to bring it.
We got the talented editor, but it's hard to work with no content. So we're recording this again because the first one, for some reason, didn't work.
So hopefully this one will.
Yeah, I think it will. I have confidence.
But before we get started, I do have something to give away today.
You have something to give away. Yeah, we haven't given anything away in a while.
We haven't. But there's a good reason for that.
What is that reason?
No one's given us anything to give away.
That's true.
Until now, though.
Yeah.
Until now.
Now we have something really cool to give away.
Yes, we do. It's a trumpet call.
A trumpet call.
Yes.
When I was growing up, I was turkey hunting at a very early age. I think I've already talked about that before, but no one that I hunted with, no one in my family or anybody had a trumpet call. So I'd never really used one until just recently.
Yeah. I've never used one in the woods. I'm the same way as you. And in fact, the only I've been thinking and toying with the idea about getting one because I've seen, several people use them. I've heard them call on them, and I've heard them tell
Yeah.
stories about, getting really good reactions from birds with them. So I've been
Yeah, it's
thinking
definitely
about it, but
a
yeah,
unique sound to have in your arsenal.
right. But it's just like anything else, in turkey calling. It's almost overwhelming to try to get into it, like
Mhm.
the barrier to entry, trying to figure out what it is you want. But luckily, our good friend Tyler Luker, he is a local forester here, and a podcast supporter, has a call company that he started called Long Cane Custom Calls, and mostly he
Very
makes
cool.
these hand turned trumpet calls. He's donated one of them to us to give away today. Got a listener here, semi randomly selected, of course. It can't be fully
Yeah.
random; it's semi random.
Did you
Um,
actually choose someone different than who I had chosen in the
I
past?
did, I did. And
That's good.
I'll give the backstory on that in just a second, or you can. But Tyler, yeah, Tyler reached out to us and he said he wanted to make a call for us to give away. So, we've chosen a listener. We're going to give this call away to. If you'd like to, have an opportunity in the future when we get other cool stuff, just make sure to leave us a rating and review so we can go back and check that list and find somebody to give it to. But Tyler was also nice enough to make a call for you and a call for me. And I
Yeah.
have supreme confidence that they're really good sounding calls. You and I just can't make them sound that way yet.
Yeah, it's gonna take some practice for sure, but man, it is a beautiful call. Like, what really, really
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
It's
I'm thankful.
functional and good looking.
Yeah.
Kind of like you, Marcus.
I don't think I get that much. Maybe the good looking, not functional. Yeah. So, who are we giving it away to?
All right, we've got MS Stewart. Have you given anything away to MS Stewart?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, MS Stewart, MSSTUART. If you're still listening and this is still your favorite podcast, as you said in your review, um, reach out to either me or Marcus. You can DM us on Instagram if you follow us there, or you can look up our emails and reach out to us that way. Either way is fine. Um, should I read? Should I read Stewart's review?
If you're so inclined.
Stewart said, "Best podcast out there to learn about the science of wild turkeys and how to manage for them. Marcus and Will are great and extremely knowledgeable on the subject, even though Will isn't the best at math."
Well.
He's got a
Yeah,
point
well,
there.
we appreciate that rating, and at least the last part of it is accurate.
All right. So we just got back from the Wild Turkey Working Group meeting last week, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I guess this is becoming a tradition now. Last year we did our inaugural Southeast Wild Turkey Working Group review episode or recap episode. Now we're doing the follow up, but this is actually the follow up to the follow up, as we were talking about
Yeah,
earlier.
we doubled down on the follow-up.
Yeah, we're really we're really following
It should
following
be
everything.
polished.
Yeah,
It should be
that's sweet.
polished now.
Um, so yeah, we took some notes on the talks while we were there. There were a lot of good state biologist presenters, some a large number of academic talks too, and
Mhm.
we just kind of wanted to share some things that we thought the listeners would be interested in.
Yeah. So, did you take notes, or is it just my notes?
I did.
Okay.
And
Well,
we decided, let me preface this by saying we decided, based on this being a retake, in the first round, I feel like we focused a little bit too much on the presentations that we gave on our research. And after talking about it, you and I felt like the better approach would be to focus on the other researchers that presented there
yeah,
for this episode, and then we can do standalone episodes on our own work as those results are starting to be finalized. I know, especially
yeah,
mine is. I've got a lot of stuff finishing up right now, and we'll
yeah.
make those into their own episodes.
Yeah, I think that's a good plan. We what you had 3.
Hmm
3 presentations from research ongoing in your lab, right?
Right. Right.
And I had 2 from mine,
Mm-hmm.
one of which you were involved with, and so were the folks in Oklahoma. Anna Muller, in particular, is our analytical
Right.
prowess, and we had
So
old Chipwood
it's
on there just for good
sh-
measure.
she's our somebody who can do math good person.
Yeah, yeah. We obviously need some help with math, so
Yeah, I mean,
that's Anna.
isn't that the sign of a good leader, right? That they find people who have strengths that complement their weaknesses.
Yes, yes.
So I'm
I'm
aware of it.
I'm I am aware of it also. So, not that, those presentations wouldn't be of interest to the audience. I think they will. In fact, I do agree with you. I think we should probably make episodes specific to those.
Hmm.
But, this is an opportunity for us to cover a lot of the other researchers and what, they're doing great work. So, it's also really fun to go to that kind of meeting because just to paint the picture for folks out there, this is basically in the eastern United States, the majority of turkey program leaders with the state agencies. There are the majority of turkey researchers and academia, and there's various other position types, and everybody across the board, whether they're a graduate student or program coordinator or whatever, they all think about turkeys on a daily basis, and they love the resource, and they care a lot about the resource. So that's I just wanted to kind of paint that picture. It's really fun to be in that atmosphere with that many people that are all focused on this bird and all love turkeys, and they're
Hmm.
all trying to do good things for the resource.
Yeah. And one thought that I had when I was, just kind of let my mind drift back to what we talked about yesterday. We tried to record this for the first time. Um, was that
Hold on, I didn't push record. No, that wasn't actually the problem.
yeah. Well, now you
Sorry,
made me
did I
lose my
distract
thought.
you from your
Yeah, I
point?
lost my thought. You know how easily that happens.
Oh
Okay.
man.
All right. So what talk stood out to you? Is there anything in particular that you want to start out with?
Well, you can't turn this back around on me.
Why not?
Well, we established that you had really solid notes, and we're going to let you lead
I
this.
had some
But
good ones. I had some good
yeah,
ones. Well, let's
no,
start
one.
with okay,
Go
let's
ahead.
start with Mike Dye from Virginia.
Yeah, I think that's where we
Yeah.
should start, and that's where I would have said too.
Yeah, it makes sense. The meeting was hosted in Blacksburg. So tradition is it kind of dictates that the host state oftentimes gets more opportunity to speak, and they
Hmm.
provide like a more detailed version of a state update, and they have the opportunity to give a presentation on just bigger picture stuff that's going on in the state as well.
Hmm.
Really cool idea because as it moves around and cycles through different states, that gives you the opportunity to learn more information in depth, right?
Hmm.
Um, but starting out high level stuff related to turkeys in Virginia. And by the way, we have been talking about trying to get one or more of those guys on to give a state update and talk about any research that they have ongoing or recently completed and what populations are doing. Um, but the good news from Virginia, and it seems to be holding consistent with a lot of these mid South and mid Atlantic states. So basically, as you go further north and get out of the deep South, that their populations are seem to be stable to increasing still.
Hmm.
So may not be seeing the declines that we're seeing in a lot of these, a lot of the deep South states. And in fact, according to their models, only 2 counties he shared were declining. The rest were stable or increasing. Harvest is still increasing. And when he said that, he was particularly referring to spring, because
Hmm.
Virginia, of course, most of you know, probably has a pretty long standing fall turkey hunting tradition as well.
Hmm.
And they have actually been pulling back some on that fall harvest because, of course, because it's either sex.
Yeah.
And that's something that I'm imagine we'll talk a good bit about today, even if we don't talk about your specific presentation. But the importance of female survival. And
Yeah.
specifically, kind of as the first data point in that conversation, as we start talking about it today, um, Mike stated that in Virginia, traditionally, as biologists, as a state agency, they've been able to reduce fall harvest when the population started to go down, and the population would start coming back up in response to that decrease in the hen harvest, particularly during the fall. I imagine
Yeah.
that's the source that response is coming from. But he said, and then once that population got back up, they would liberalize fall harvest again, and they could kind of, do some adaptive harvest
Hmm.
management to keep the population where they wanted to. But he says, unfortunately, that doesn't seem to work any longer.
Yeah.
So when they back off of the fall harvest, where they're not really seeing a response.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it last time we recorded this same episode. Uh, things seem to be doing pretty good, especially relative to some of the other southeastern states and
Hmm.
Virginia, and like you said, in other of the mid Atlantic states. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't any issues, and that's one thing that he mentioned was
Yeah,
they used to regulate populations with the hen hen harvest, but that doesn't seem to be working. And I think you also noted uh, in your notes from what he was talking about that
that you remember that I haven't. Yeah, I didn't get to
yeah,
that bullet point yet.
yeah. Well, I think it was important
Yep.
that the what was it, surveys of the hunting community
Yeah,
that they
they're
were basing it on.
They said that although spring hunter numbers have stayed relatively consistent since 2002, which that
Yeah,
surprised me in and of itself. I would have
yeah.
expected that they've increased since '02.
Well, and just about everybody out there would say that,
Yeah.
especially the hunters in Virginia.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I deal with that, and I'm sure you do as well. All the time, people talk about how many more hunters there are now,
Right.
and there's another data point showing that they seem to be relatively stable over the last
Right.
20 years,
Yeah.
but they are putting in more effort to kill a turkey. It's
Yeah, that
taking
was
them
the other
longer.
part. Yeah,
Yeah,
the numbers have been consistent, but they're spending more time to kill a bird.
yeah. So when you look at those two inferences that Mike was talking about, which by the way, I have asked Mike if he would be willing to come on the show, and he
Mhm.
said that he would.
Yeah.
So we'll reach out soon and try to make that happen because I'd like to. I think he's got a lot of really interesting things to talk about from Virginia, and we have a lot of listeners in Virginia. But those are kind of indicators to me that we might want to watch the situation, which they
Mhm.
are.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people doing that in multiple states. They're, keeping up with these different indicators,
Mhm.
trying to keep an eye on populations and making sure we are aware quickly of what's going on.
Right. Yep. So, um if you're ready to move on from Virginia, I was going to tie that into the presentation that Mark McConnell gave.
Sure.
So, um, Mark had a lot of interesting data, and for those of you that are not familiar with Mark McConnell, Dr. Mark McConnell, he's our counterpart at Mississippi State, basically,
Hmm.
and he has been on before. He talked about an experimental season delay project that they conducted in Mississippi. Um,
Which was
not
part of the presentation that he gave
right,
at this meeting.
right, yeah,
And what was that, episode 4 or 5?
yeah. It was early
And
on.
so it was really early on last year. So you could go back and check that out, and we talked
Hmm.
with him in detail about that. But they have gotten much closer to publishing that work,
Right,
as
right.
well as what you're about to talk about.
Yeah. So in that study, unlike the Tennessee study, they weren't actually tagging hens and monitoring vital rates. But they did have wildlife management areas where the season was delayed, and then they had control areas that were nearby wildlife management areas as well, where they didn't do the delay. And basically, they tracked a lot of hunter observations over a several year period in response to that. And they didn't find that, for instance, hunters were hearing more gobbles or encountering more turkeys and things like that.
Yeah, they didn't pick up an effect, in other words,
Hmm.
of the delay.
Yeah,
And
and from hunter observations.
I think that if I remember correctly, they had several years of that information before any treatments were implemented. So still, one of those designs where it's replicated and a before after control
Hmm.
impact.
Yep. Yep.
So
So strong in that regard. It'd be great if they also had the vital rate data to pair with the hunter observations, but
yeah,
we can't always do the study that we want to do. I mean, that's just the
yeah,
reality of it. Still good information. But then they took that a step further, or he took it a step further in his presentation, and he and Dana Morin, also a professor at Mississippi State, did some simulation modeling of turkey
yeah.
populations.
And
And
I think she's the one that does math good
yeah, she
in
does
there.
math good. She's the math person there. And so the long story short is they wanted to look at various scenarios and how it changed population growth. They didn't find that male harvest influenced population growth, but they did find that hen survival and poults per hen, that recruitment ratio, in other words, are most important to population growth.
Yep, checks out. So we've
Multiple studies now coalescing around that.
Yeah, and just to give the audience a little bit of a teaser, one of the things that I presented on was the long term, basically all of the literature published on hen survival, and we'll
Hmm.
talk about that in a later episode. But the reason that I went on that deep dive in the literature and focused on annual hen survival is because you know Mark presented it in their work, the Lundy et al. Paper that Coulter Chipwood came on, they found it in that research, and
Yep.
probably five or six other research groups all the way back to the early '90s. In all the cases, and the Chad Lehman talked about it from South Dakota
Hmm.
on the show. Uh, in every case where people were trying to see which vital rate was most important to the trajectory of populations across the board, annual hen survival has been the one or one of the top two.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's definitely important.
And in fairly long-lived species, of wildlife, which turkeys are fairly long-lived compared to a lot of species of wildlife,
Sure.
that generally is true. Adult female survival governs population growth, and I mean, a lot of our listeners are probably familiar with the concept of using doe harvest to manipulate population levels.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's a perfect example. So it makes a lot of sense that he would find that and present it,
right.
that the female survival and then poult rearing success. Is that what you said was secondary?
Hmm.
So pretty important, and we did see quite a bit of focus, from their group. Nick Backner, uh, he presented on some hen survival information across the southeast as well.
Hmm.
So I was glad to see there was a lot of focus in
Yeah.
this meeting on annual hen survival
Which is
because
unusual in the
yeah,
Southeast deer, or not Southeast deer. We have a Southeast deer study group meeting, and this is a Southeast wild turkey working group meeting.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, in that Southeastern regional meeting, I don't feel like, and what do I know? I've only been going to that particular meeting for a couple of years because it's mostly just been a biologist meeting.
yeah,
State biologist. In the past, they've only recently started to extend that invite to some academics. But anyway, yeah, I mean, the Southeast in general does not have a lot of female turkey hunting opportunity,
yeah,
right? So it's not something that's been heavily focused on or researched here,
right. Yeah,
and
it's
we
not
don't have high winter severity that's killing off birds. So
right. Yeah, so a lot of the work on annual hen survival, we have had a fair number of studies that reported that in the South, but a lot of the focus of the work that has reported that over the years has been in states that they were evaluating at fall harvest on
right,
hens.
right,
So, Virginia, West Virginia, definitely two major contributors there. There's several studies from the Midwest. Missouri has contributed a couple, a
Mm-hmm.
bunch. Vangilder, I guess, and Kurzejeski, who we had on the show, did
Yeah.
some of that work, led some of it. So, there that was the context, especially in the '90s, that people were studying in survival,
Right.
and it made a lot of sense because in some cases the hen harvest was more than 10% of the
Right.
population.
Yeah.
So, but the other context is when we have extreme winters or they're evaluating a restocking effort or something like that, where you know the hen survival is for some reason restricted,
Mm-hmm.
for some reason other than hunting. I mean,
Right. Right. I was thinking about talking about the Kentucky and Tennessee banding project. That one was interesting.
yeah.
Um, but then I don't know. Do you feel like the hen survival stuff ties in better to what Lindsay Phillips presented?
Well, I think we should talk about both. You
Yeah.
know, really with Lindsay's work, that's the University of Tennessee bunch, whereas the
Mm-hmm.
banding project from Tennessee was the Tennessee Tech bunch, who's also working in Kentucky.
That's right.
And not that that necessarily matters to our audience, but I do think it's a pretty cool thing
Mm-hmm.
that we have so many different research groups trying to tackle questions and they're taking different approaches to doing that. And, that's what we need.
Yeah.
We need lots of minds set on this and trying to
Mm-hmm.
figure out from different perspectives and different backgrounds and different skill sets and
Mm-hmm.
different areas, trying to tackle some of these issues. So I think that's cool. But with Lindsay's work, I thought it was pretty interesting that, you know, in their study, they saw some direct evidence that the populations in that South Middle Tennessee study area were responding to density dependent factors.
Mm-hmm.
It
Yeah.
wasn't that long ago where we didn't even think that was a thing, right? Like,
Yeah. I mean, it's some people still debate whether or not density dependence is a thing in turkeys.
yeah,
We have
and
we have some episodes on that.
yeah, and we talked about one of the papers that, from my perspective, did a pretty great job of showing some data that was strongly suggestive of density dependence. That was the
Yeah.
Byrne et al. Paper that we covered
In
last year.
multiple episodes.
Yeah, but essentially, just to lay out for you guys what she presented on, she looked at the group size of hens in these study areas during all the capture efforts and then related that to survival of hens and nesting success and these vital rates that we're constantly measuring in these populations, and found a negative relationship, essentially, is the best way to think about it. So as
Mm-hmm.
you increase group size, you decrease survival of the hens and decrease nesting success. That's kind of the idea that we're talking about when we say density dependent. What we mean is that the density is reaching some threshold where there's a negative feedback on those vital
Right.
rates.
Right. Yeah.
And
So populations can increase forever until something runs out.
yeah,
So in this instance, what she was showing is the bird numbers increase, fewer resources distribute, or the same amount of resources distribute among a larger group, and something has to be sacrificed, right?
yeah. So that I think the debate really is about, well, what is driving that pattern. That's where to me, that we don't know what the limiting factor is that causes that relationship. But
Right.
she presented some evidence, and then coupling that with Byrne et al. and others, uh, you know, it seems like this is a process
I think that's
that's
something that
affecting turkeys.
yeah, I think we're going to learn a lot more about density dependence in turkeys over the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I think so. So it's really cool. But that being said, I think we can move on to the banding study.
Yeah, so Kentucky and Tennessee have been banding a lot of gobblers and jakes too.
Yeah, what
Um,
what was the sample size? Do you remember? Was
I
it like
can't.
eighteen
It
1,800 or
was,
something?
gosh, man, I was gonna say around 1,000, but it may have been well over 1,000. It was a
I was
lot.
thinking it. Yeah,
Yeah, it was a lot, all over the states of, all over both states. Um, but one of the things that we were talking about a minute ago is how when you start to see multiple studies from different areas, different landscape contexts, different regulation sets showing the same thing going on in populations, that's when you really start to take notice, right?
yeah.
And one of the things that we have talked about on here recently, in particular with our episode with Patrick Whiteman from UGA, was that in their study, they didn't see significant differences in male survival across Georgia, South Carolina, and Louisiana, despite the differences in rule sets, for the regulation sets for the hunting seasons in those
Mhm.
areas. It's like, that's interesting. I mean, you would think like difference in season length, difference in bag limit, I don't know what else differs between all those states. But yeah, probably some states take more birds and some states take fewer birds, but they
Yeah, it's a
didn't see that.
proportion of the number they have.
Right. They didn't see that, and Kentucky and Tennessee didn't see that either.
Yeah,
So
different
it's
research group for the most
right.
part.
So no difference in male harvest rate between states, no effective regulations on harvest rates.
Yeah.
And then they also they went back and they looked at those harvest rates. So like for the spring, they would look at the harvest rate and then they would correlate that with that summer's poult per hen ratio that was collected during
Mhm.
brood surveys to see if there was a relationship between male harvest and turkey production. And they didn't find one there.
Yeah,
But
that one I've been trying to wrap my head around. First of all, I did take a look. It was in the middle of what we said. I think you said 1,000. I said 1,800. It's
mhm,
1333 is what they said.
still, I mean, that's a lot of birds.
Oh yeah, huge sample size. Really, really great effort. I mean, over several years in 2 states, that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, uh, but when I was thinking about this pattern, it didn't. You know, she was up there talking about the work and said that, and I sort of started mulling it over, and then we talked about it when we recorded the first version of this episode, and it didn't. It's still it's been bouncing around in the old noggin. I just haven't put it together, and I was like, "What is going on? How could you have a big poult per hen year?" And then, like, Mike talked about it, and we had a couple other state agencies talk about it. So Mike's the one
Hmm.
from Virginia, but other state agencies where we see this reproduction carry over into a higher harvest 2 years later.
Hmm.
But then I realized, oh, they're looking at the percentage of males harvested, right? So we're seeing an increase in the overall harvest, but there's more birds on the landscape when you had higher reproduction too. So it's still about the same. You end up with that
Hmm.
30% roughly
Yeah. Yeah.
either way, right?
Yep.
So it's just scaling
Okay.
with.
Yeah. I see what you're saying.
So it's been hard for me to work that out because we have shown some pretty clear evidence. And when I say we, I mean, the state agencies that are tracking this stuff
Yeah.
have shown clear evidence when you have a big reproductive year, 2 years later, you have a spike in harvest,
Hmm.
which makes intuitive sense.
Yeah.
But it was hard for me to put that together. And I finally kind of came to that conclusion. Okay, yeah, you have more birds on the landscape and you harvest
Right.
more birds because of it, but it's still the same proportion of birds being harvested.
Hmm.
That makes more sense. So
Right.
now I understand how they determine, how they came up with that answer, even with those other things being true.
Glad you figured it out.
Are you still with me or
I'm still
did
with you.
okay. You didn't seem too excited about that epiphany.
Well,
It's really simple, I know.
I was trying to make sure I had another, factoid to share queued up
Oh, is
while you
this
were
from
finishing that up.
the Riggs et al. Paper,
No,
or
I
is
was
it
going to move on
okay.
unless you had something that was related to that.
No, that was the main
Okay.
thing that I thought was really interesting about it is,
Right.
first of all, it seems to be relatively consistent, like you were talking about. But then I came to the realization that even if the total harvest goes up, you could still be harvesting the same
Hmm.
proportion of the birds.
Right. So Chris Mormon, another previous wild turkey science guest, professor at NC State University
Was my
and
major advisor.
Marcus's former advisor, gave a presentation on that statewide, that North Carolina turkey project that he came on our show and talked about, and shared a lot of that information that he shared previously with us. But one thing that he also shared that really stood out to me, and I think he even shared that when he came on here with us, Marcus. But it's just like, gotten lost in all the static over time. You
Lost
know,
in the
you
sauce.
well, it's just like you hear so many cool facts or interesting figures, and you just wish you could retain them all, but you can't. Um, but they saw back to back to back in 3 years, brood success in that study went from 0% to 40% to 33%.
Yeah,
So the first year of the study, 0%. The next year, it was 40%. And then the following year, it went back down to probably something that was more closer to the long term average, around a third,
yeah.
33%.
So that
Um,
was 2020,
hmm
then 2021, then 2022,
that's right.
where you
Yeah.
had that really big up and down.
Yeah. And the one reason I wanted to mention that is because, one, it's just remarkable. It's just kind of crazy to see that the birds do that.
Mhm.
But two, the reason that I wanted to mention it is because we talk to folks all the time that change something on their property and say that they got a huge response out of it. These data are one of the reasons that we say that you have to be cautious doing that,
Yeah,
because it could have just been that you made the change during a 0% brood survival year, and then the following year was a 40% brood survival year, and that happened independent of the change, or it would have happened independent of the change that you made.
right. Yeah, that's something I wanted to point out with this. The first year they had 0% brood success.
Hmm.
Not like they didn't observe any,
Right.
and that was all across the state. It's not like that was all on one study area.
No.
They had
It
hundreds of landowners involved in this study
Yeah, it was like
across.
300 or something like that.
Yeah, and they had, well, it was 250 maybe, something like
Okay.
that. But they all three regions, sort of like the mountains, Piedmont, and Low Country in North Carolina, they had birds representing all of those regions, and that's across the board.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean there was no reproduction in the state that year, but my point
Obviously,
is,
turkeys reproduced that year,
yeah,
but it was way down compared to normal years.
yeah, it was, yeah, I think we can agree that it was low,
Right.
and then I look at that and it's like, well, clearly something was going on at a larger scale. That
Hmm.
wasn't just a side effect.
No.
It wasn't just they happened to be on a site that was bad.
No.
That's a process, and I think that's important for people to realize that there are things going on at a scale that we aren't managing at
Yeah.
that might be influencing the outcome of what
Yeah.
you're doing and what you're observing on your property.
Well, and here's the other thing too. Going from 0% brood success to 40% in the next year, the predator community didn't change that enough to make that difference over that timeline.
Yeah, it's not like you had a bunch of coyotes and the next year you don't have any.
And I'm not saying that again, we always have to rehash this, or we're going to get all the hate mail. But not saying that predators are killing tons of turkeys. There's no
Yeah.
denying that. I'm just saying
Well,
that that
here's what will smooth it out. The habitat didn't all
no,
it
the
wasn't
habitat
all
didn't change that much either.
yeah, it wasn't awful this year and then awesome the next
No,
year either.
no,
You threw out the one hot button issue and we'll throw out the other one.
yeah,
Those things did not change in that
right,
temporal scale to cause that variation. There's
right.
something else going on.
And the intriguing thing about this is, y'all know, from listening to the fly floater mate episode, you know all about the wet hen hypothesis now. And there's a chance that that maybe played a role. But the interesting thing about it is, you and I had a conversation with Chris, and he said that they weren't able to find evidence that predation went after rainfall events.
Yeah, they looked for that.
So what is going on at the scale of North Carolina that makes brood success go from 0 to 40% over the span of 1 year?
Well, one thing that Chris did mention, he talked to Harper, I think, from Tennessee,
Yep,
and their vital rates mirrored each other during those
yep.
years.
I know. How wild is that?
So like it's even broader scale, man. That like we gotta get after that question.
I know, exactly, and I mean, think about it too. If you have back to back, or maybe even 3 of those 40% years in a row, or conversely, you have 3 of those 0% years in a row, at the end of that 3 years, your turkey population is a very fundamentally different place.
Yeah.
And so it's important to understand what factors are influencing that at that large scale. And I would love to do more work in that area, because maybe we don't have control over it, we can't manage it, but at least we can predict it.
Yeah. And it may start making some of these other practices much more important to target them. Like
Yeah,
if we could predict, oh, things are gonna be bad, maybe there's some ways that we can mitigate that.
yeah,
At least at the
absolutely.
local level.
All right, so the last thing that I really wanted to touch on, was that there were a lot of talks actually on hunter satisfaction.
Yeah.
That was a major theme, and I think a lot of our listeners would be appreciative of hearing that, because many of those talks about hunter satisfaction were either by state biologists that were focused on it and making sure that they understood what keeps hunters happy, or they were academics that were funded by state wildlife agencies in many cases, to figure out what makes hunters tick and how
Mhm.
the various alternatives that they're using to manage turkeys influence that satisfaction. That's something that they know that they need to keep in
Yeah.
mind.
Well, I think that is a good thing to emphasize here is a lot, I wouldn't say all of them, but a large portion of the people in that room are turkey hunters,
Hmm.
and the state agencies are very concerned with hunter satisfaction. So,
Absolutely.
a primary constituency, and we have many researchers, like you're saying, that are focused on that. And I wanted to emphasize it after you emphasized it because I do hear chatter commonly that, and you see it online, this idea that there's, the state agencies are out to get the hunters, or
Hmm.
that they're being driven by taking away opportunity or something. Like you hear all kinds of things like that, and it's like that is not reflected in the
Yeah.
sentiment from the people involved or the research that gets funded.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it doesn't make sense if you understand their business model either, right?
Yeah,
And the
yeah, they
funding that comes through hunting licenses.
yeah, that's funding the show.
Right.
So, and a lot of conservation work for a lot of species is being
Yeah.
funded through that model.
So on that note, Allison Keever from Tennessee Tech gave a presentation, and boy, am I going to screw this one all up, Marcus.
Maybe we ought to ask her to come on and explain it
we
to us.
we probably should, and the reason for that is it was a fairly complex modeling exercise that they used that was taking a bunch of different inputs and seeing how various season frameworks would impact hunter satisfaction. And so they had this range of season frameworks that they evaluated that ranged from, what they considered very liberal seasons that maximized hunter opportunity. Think, long, start early, high bag limit. That would be all those would be liberal characteristics of a season.
Mhm.
And then they ran the spectrum of everything between. Well, not they created a couple of scenarios that were more middle of the road, and then they went all the way to the opposite end of the extreme, which was a closing the season, as needed to recover populations.
Yeah, so
And
that would be an extreme scenario, like,
yeah,
we're afraid this population is gonna go extinct if we don't stop,
exactly. And
like.
and when she was given that talk, I remember I kind of like furrowed my brow for a second because she was like, "We were looking at hunter satisfaction. One of the alternatives we evaluated was a closed season." And I'm like, "Well, how could a hunter be satisfied with a
Yeah,
closed season? Like that completely undermines their objective, which is hunting, right?"
right.
But she then explained that the idea behind it would be that you are ensuring hunting can resume later on,
Yeah,
right? It's for population
yeah. You're
sustainability.
choosing to close the season to avoid extinction.
Right.
I
Yeah.
guess
So
that.
hunters would prefer not hunting, but turkeys surviving compared
Yeah.
to hunting and turkeys going extinct.
When I do think it's important, we're not talking about actions that are being taken
No,
anywhere. Like this
no.
isn't. She's
It was all
Yeah.
hypothetical.
These are all just scenarios where they're modeling these different aspects to see how they affect hunter
Yeah.
satisfaction.
Right. So what was odd is it seemed like that modeling exercise, and maybe you have more insight into this. I don't know that I'm going to explain it well. But that model tended to gravitate more towards the opposite ends of the extremes. Like it would gravitate more towards the liberal season or the closed season. And to the best of my ability, the way that I understood it was that going from the liberal to the more moderate seasons in their modeling exercise didn't show um, significant, or it wasn't a drastic enough change in the regulation set that they predicted a corresponding change in the population that would increase hunter satisfaction. So going from really liberal to moderate was not enough. You almost had to go all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum before you affected the population. So hunters were happy with a liberal season because they got a lot of opportunity, and they were sometimes happy with a closed season in the simulation because it would bring the population back. But
Yeah.
the moderate choices weren't that much different from the liberal season in terms of their population
Yeah. The
impact and how that
normal.
carried over
I think the
into
way.
satisfaction.
I think the way to put it simply is the range of season frameworks that we're normally operating in terms of like how much the bag limit might get changed or
Hmm.
how much the seasons might get changed in terms of the opening date or the length or whatever. The normal range that we're operating in real life and the hunter satisfaction stays pretty similar across that whole gradient.
Yeah.
But it's not till you get to some extreme thing, either on either side. It's not until you're looking at those extremes where you see this really dramatic shift
Where
in
where it's enough to
satisfaction.
move the needle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a really interesting approach because they
Right.
they did focus groups. I don't know if you saw
Hmm.
that where they were talking to people and getting their uh, feedback on different things and what would be acceptable given different scenarios
Right.
and what those objectives are. So it's really really cool approach. But I kind of viewed it that way that that's that's good that the hunter satisfaction remains relatively stable across the normal range we're operating in.
Hmm.
So, it allows state agencies some flexibility to make tweaks if needed without sacrificing hunter satisfaction, at least overall.
Yeah. That was a lot shorter way of explaining it than the way that I did. That was
I don't
probably not only much longer, but probably completely inaccurate as well.
well, I don't I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't know what the heck you were saying.
I don't even remember it.
I was just I almost stopped you like 7 times, like, "You just stop right here." I'm kidding. No, I think you were accurate, but,
Yeah,
I just saw a different way to say
accurate
it.
but not precise.
Maybe that's it. Yeah, there was a spread. We need to get that tighter choke on that thing right
There you go.
there.
I was throwing some flyers there. Um, that's why people like us. They can connect with
It's
us
like
on
a
that. But those were most of the highlights I had.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've covered a large portion of the studies other than the ones that we presented.
Hmm.
which we're not avoiding those, but we did want to take the time to cover other folks
We
that aren't
realized,
on this podcast all the time.
yeah, we realized quickly yesterday when we recorded that episode that we lacked the ability to cliff notes our studies.
Yeah, we ended
Like
up with like 40 minutes on one.
I
one
know, I know. I can summarize someone else's like 5-year study in 2 bullet points, but then I go in and talk about, some little 2-year study I did, and I've got to have like an episode series on it.
Yeah. Well, it's not to diminish. We didn't cover a few of the studies.
Right.
Like for example, Laura Horton was one of Rick Gerhold's students.
Mhm.
Now soon to be a postdoc, I think. Presented on some of their pathogen related work from
Right.
Tennessee,
Yeah.
and we just had Rick on the show recently, and he covered a lot of it and even talked about how awesome of a job Laura did during that study. So I don't think we need to belabor some of these. I did want to ask you about one of your studies, if we can just kind of,
Mhm.
uh, not spend a whole episode series worth of time on it, but I did
Well,
find it pretty
I take back
interesting.
I take back what I said earlier. We have not learned our lesson.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, your student
Right.
presented a few things, and I thought he did a great job with that. But I was intrigued about the disease prevalence,
Mhm.
particularly the LPDV.
Mhm.
So you guys, well, you can tell the audience if you want to, but you found a pretty high rate of infection, and this was hunter harvested. So I'm trying to give the cliff notes, not let you have the
Yeah.
opportunity to take the stage for the next hour. Uh, but you know
It's probably better if I just don't.
you had this amazing effort from the hunting community to help get you carcasses of birds they harvested from
Yeah,
all over the state.
over 900 birds, and these guys were. It doesn't sound like a big deal till you think about collecting birds from your hunting buddies, because that's how we did it. Because we couldn't go to every single person's house,
Yeah.
right? So we were
So you
trying to
had
get
like these nodes.
collection points.
Yeah.
And these guys were constantly calling us, being like, "Man, I got 4 birds in my freezer. I got 5 birds in my freezer. I
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
20 birds in my chest freezer."
Yeah.
And so it was a pain.
Well, that's amazing, that they supported y'all like that. But you guys found what 73, almost 73%, 609 out of 838 of the sampled birds had LPDV
I know.
detected.
I
That's
know.
so. Just to give people context, what is it on average in the South?
Most of the studies have been around 50%.
Yeah, and one of our study sites in Florida, which we'll talk about in greater detail and at some later date, but one of our sites was about 50, and the other one was really low
Mhm.
in the South Florida study. But when I saw that, I was like, man, that is high.
Yeah.
And then he laid it out and kind of put it into context. That's more similar to what you see in the northern populations.
Yeah. Like even up into Canada was one of the studies he cited that had a
Yeah,
similar rate.
yeah, and I was really intrigued about that.
There's so much about that disease that we don't know yet. We
Yeah,
really don't. We think that it might be spread by biting insects because I think there was a squid study that was able to show that injecting the virus under the skin transmitted it. But I but I don't know, anything about like really where it originated, or if it's spreading outwardly from there, or if it's
yeah.
jumping around, or
What are the consequences to a
if
population and its
right,
productivity?
or if it's already reached an endemic prevalence, or if that prevalence rate is still going up. I don't know.
Yeah,
Because that's the other thing, is like if I compare our prevalence rate to a one of 50%, but that was collected 10 years ago, is that number relevant anymore? Has prevalence still been increasing throughout that
hmm
10-year period? I think we just don't know. Um, and some people are telling us like, hey, we've had enough of our tagged birds test positive for LPDV, and they didn't really seem to have, any. They didn't really behave any differently. I haven't seen any data published on that yet. I'm just hearing anecdotes, right?
hmm
But it's something that I'm still keeping my eye on. I'm not ready to look away from it yet
Yeah, and multiple groups
and turn my
did.
back. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. Well, multiple groups did bring up that they had plans to try to evaluate how some of these
Yes.
pathogens affect survival and behavior,
Because
and reproduction.
there are a lot of these birds that are tagged in these studies that they pulled the blood sample from too, so
Yeah.
they
Like
can.
we had
Yeah.
in Florida, our our pathogen detection in general, we screened birds for like 4 pathogens,
Hmm.
and it was over 70% of the birds that we tagged had something.
Yeah.
So, you start to expand that out across all these study areas, and all of a sudden we probably have thousands of examples of birds that had something
Yeah.
that we know when at capture it has it. And then you
Yeah.
can start to look at these consequences over time. I'm glad to hear there's quite a few researchers that are
Hmm.
doing that.
Hmm.
So, yeah, no,
Well, you did a good job interviewing me on that and keeping me from going too long.
yeah. Well, there was also some cool studies on, roosting behavior and exploring male wild turkey behavior during the lecking
Hmm.
period or
Right.
exploded leck or whatever. So lots of cool stuff that we got to look at and hear people talk about, and yeah, I felt like it was a really valuable experience, and I love being in that kind of atmosphere,
Hmm.
hearing all these people, and I'm sure uh, we'll be trying to get some of these folks on in the near future to talk about some of these really cool things in more detail.
Yep. Got some cool ones already planned too.
Yeah, I know. I'm pretty excited about the one we just got planned today.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Are you gonna tease it any more than that, or
I
just
don't
leave it
think
at
so.
that? All right.
You know what? I think that some people out there really enjoyed the history that we just recently did. I know we had some people that really enjoyed that Legends of Research, Turkey
Yeah.
Research episode
Hmm.
we did. So we've been cooking up some strategies to bring you more of that kind of content because
Yeah.
I do think it's cool to get some historical perspective and also learn about some of the historical legends.
Well, that's what I feel like we kind of did last summer. We kind of we got out of the peak of turkey season, and I felt like we cruised more into talking about some less like cutting edge science type stuff. We went back and we did some historical stuff. We did talk some habitat management and things like that.
Mhm.
When folks are out working on their farm in the summertime and stuff, so I think that's relevant. But um, I don't know. Maybe we'll follow a similar path this summer, or maybe not. But
Yeah,
I guess we'll see.
I never can tell.
Yeah.
We get one of us gets an idea or we get a comment from somebody and it sends us down a new path, But we do have a lot of really cool ideas on ways to go with this, and that's kind of nice in a sense. We're not
Hmm.
idea limited at this
No, we're
point.
not.
So, lots
Maybe
of
we're talent limited.
yeah. Charlotte, I would like to thank you again for making us look better than we are.
Yeah. There you go.
And sound better than we are,
There you
particularly.
go. Well, it
Yeah.
sounds like I got a kid screaming downstairs,
Yeah.
so I might should sign off.
Yeah. Turned a turkey loose in the house downstairs. Yeah. Well, uh, I felt like that was a pretty good coverage. There were some other studies, but like I said, we've covered them in other episodes, and we're
Hmm.
intending to try to get somebody on to cover it in more detail if not. But really fun experience, and hopefully people appreciate that. We're trying to continue to bring you the conversation, and that's
Hmm.
where the conversation among managers and researchers was.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, thanks
Well, we
everybody.
appreciate y'all. Leave us a
Yeah.
rating and review, and it'll help us spread the word and give you a shot at something cool.
Yeah, get something good. Yeah. Other than the knowledge we pack into every one of these episodes.
Oh, well, that's a given.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for listening and all the support. It's been great. We really appreciate it.
Thank y'all. Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.